Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us today. My name is Roberto Colangelo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ain Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And I'd like to start by saying that I've been in this role for a little bit over a year, and something dramatic is happening at the university. Entrepreneurship has become a central theme across the campus. And the interest in entrepreneurship has led to the Ain Center having over 100 student businesses weeks ago. And what's interesting about that as well is the number of businesses is interesting, but the quality of the businesses as well. We have students working on projects that are landing on Mars. We have students working on solving Alzheimer's. We have students growing tissues that will replace animal trials for the FDA. So it's a big spectrum. And I think the Ain Center has finally found a formula that allows student researchers and faculty to begin commercializing their ideas. The appetite for entrepreneurship has never been stronger, and this event is a reflection of that momentum. The genesis of the event comes from the newly launched University of Rochester Entrepreneurs Network, an initiative within alumni relations and constituent engagement designed to bring together alumni, students who share a passion for entrepreneurship. The organization is co-chaired by David Chen and Jeannie Uyanik. Sorry. The network recognizes that many of you as entrepreneurs yourselves understand the importance of building connections and support systems throughout your lifetime, not just in the early stages. It aims to foster a vibrant cross-generational community where alumni and students can share insights, collaborate, and help guide the next generation of innovators. Through connection, shared experience, and mutual support, the group helps members grow their ventures and strengthens the University of Rochester's role as a hub for innovation. We're also fortunate to have our co-hosts and sponsors, the Simon Business School, Hagem Engineering, and our affiliates, NextCorp, represented by Jim Senall, president of NextCorp, and Rami Katz, who's the new president of Excell Partners. In addition, we're lucky to have graduates of the university, Karla George, who is CEO of FLX AI. Welcome. Daphne on screen, CEO of HeronAi. Although I'd like to take a second because as I looked up Daphne, she is Dr. Daphne Pariser, and she is the only winner of coming out of the University of Rochester at 43 North. She won $1 million business plan competition and is a
Thank you.
So we have a really good panel of entrepreneurs here. Now, having said that, the timing could not be better for something else. We're living through what economists are calling the dematerialization of the economy, the collapse of physical inputs needed to create value. When I was young, a generation ago, starting a business meant factories, warehouses, assets. Today, an entrepreneur with a laptop and a large language model can prototype a product in hours, test it by the afternoon, and iterate before dinner. AI is that engine that's shifting and compressing entire stages of the value chain, which is exactly why we are fortunate to have Elizabeth MacBride moderating today's conversation. Elizabeth is an award-winning journalist, a senior consultant with WeFi and the World Bank, and co-author of the national bestseller, Capital Evolution, The New American Economy, the book that we having a copy of. In that book, she and venture capitalist Seth Levine argue that we are moving toward what they call dynamic capitalism, a model that balances profit with purpose and asks who gets to participate in the economy, not just who has the best technology. That question is at the heart of tonight's panel. Elizabeth's reporting from the Arkansas Delta to Cambodia to Gaza has shown that entrepreneurship is not a Silicon Valley monopoly. It emerges wherever people have the tools, the capital, and the permission to create, and AI is dramatically expanding that circle. Our panelists will explore these relationships. Finally, a reception follows immediately after the event at the Eisenberg Rotunda in Schlegel Hall. Please join us there. And now, please welcome journalist, entrepreneur, and author, Elizabeth MacBride.
Thank you so much, Roberto. And I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm going to move things along quickly because we have a pretty constrained time span. But I wanted to say that I wrote this latest book, Capital Evolution, to offer a framework for this incredible time of transition that we're in. The hope is that we can reshape capitalism so that AI becomes load-bearing and does lower barriers to entry for many more people to become owners in the economy. And so that's really what the book is about, is reshaping the system so that technologies like AI can lift more people. I wanted to say, I think the first step for that transition, to make that transition a good one, is for people to let go of their fear and anxiety around AI. So you'll hear that theme running through our conversation today. For me, many people have different steps for letting go of their fear. Part of my process is investigating the data. So I wanted to share 3 data points coming out of Washington, D.C., about what the early impacts of AI on the economy are showing. First, economists are saying that they actually are not seeing a radical shift in the labor markets yet. It may show up, but the early impact, despite the headlines, which are anecdotal, the data is actually showing that the impact is limited so far to entry-level workers, which is not great for a college campus, but it is also not huge for the entire economy. So there are still lots of opportunities out there. The second thing that the data is showing is that there's a huge surge of entrepreneurship coming on top of an already accelerating base. After the pandemic, there was a big increase in entrepreneurship, and AI is accelerating that. And then thirdly, coming from my social justice heart, I just want to note that this will be disruptive, and those disruptions are likely going to fall not fairly, but on specific groups of people. And the early indications are the people who will be impacted the most are young people and women. And so those are things just to keep in mind broadly as we're in our discussion and as you're working through the impact of this technology in your lives. So with that, I have one logistical note for if you're here in the auditorium. There are going to be people collecting questions. So I think you have note cards. So if you have one, just raise your hand and someone will come, and we'll get to the questions at the end of our hour. Secondly, if you're joining us remotely, please input your questions into the space allotted there. And then we'll do our best to get to as many possible. So since we are on a tight schedule, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves as they give their first answer. Okay, let's start. So the first broad topic we wanted to cover is the question of defining AI and building real competitive advantage through AI. The first question then is going to Karla. So would you please introduce yourself and then tell us how you define AI, and if you could share some use cases of businesses that are employing it.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Karla George. I'm a proud Simon alum, former U of R employee. And hi, Robbie. And I'm now the CEO of FLX AI, which is an AI advisory and execution services firm that spun out of the university back in 2021. Elizabeth, you've asked simultaneously the easiest question of the day and the hardest all in one. Explaining AI is kind of like explaining what is a religion or what is medicine, right? It's seemingly a simple question, but very complex under the hood. But if we think about AI in its simplest form, it's a technology that enables a machine, i.e. a computer, to mimic human intelligence. And I think we can all agree on that answer and recognize that we've been living with AI in our lives for years now. And despite the current phenomenon and the focus on large language models, we've been the beneficiary of technologies, facial recognition on our phone, recommendation engines that Netflix tells us which movie we would like to watch next or what article of clothing would complement what's in our basket. We've been consumers of AI for a very long time. And I think it's important just to baseline with this point so that we might focus today's conversation in the language and agentic space, but there's a lot of other tools in the AI toolbox that we as business leaders have at our disposal to make real impact. With regards to use cases, just to highlight this point, I'll give one of my favorite cases that we worked on at FLX. It's non-language based. We had a business out of Colorado who they were geological experts, and they were brought in by their end customer, who was an oil and gas pipeline, to help identify potential geohazards along the oil and gas corridor, right? And traditionally, you'd have an expert go in and annotate some really thick, hard to understand data for a novice, or the imagery. What we ended up doing was building a computer vision model that took an exercise that previously took several weeks to complete, down to seconds, minutes and seconds, right? So
that's great. Daphne, if we could just turn to you, and again, please introduce yourself a little, and tell us what are some of the biggest misperceptions about AI, and if you could also share a use case or two, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm excited about this panel and looking forward to tell you a little bit more. I'm Daphne Pariser. I did my graduate work at U of R, and then went on and did a postdoc at both Harvard and MIT. And now I am the CEO and founder of HeronAi, and basically the product that we're building right now really helps people standardize and analyze data from fragmented systems, and we utilize a lot of AI to do that. I think in terms of the question where there's a lot of misperceptions about AI, I think one of the big things that we kind of already touched on a little bit earlier is that AI, a lot of people think that AI replaces humans. And I think that there are aspects of work that AI is replacing right now. But I think in terms of these large industries that are going to be completely disrupted by AI that people are talking a lot about, I think like we were saying earlier, the data just isn't there yet. And I think that there's going to be a lot more that needs to happen before those huge disruptions actually occur. And so like in the work that I do, I really focus a lot on financial data and actually accounting. And a lot of people are very worried that CFO jobs are going to be replaced because of AI. And I think that that's really not the case. I think more that AI will be a tool that they will use to assist them in their job to actually probably increase productivity and likely increase the number of clients that they can work with. And I would say maybe the second thing that I would say is important is that a lot of people think about AI in terms of models. So like LLMs or things along those lines. But I think that it's really important to think a little bit more broadly about what AI actually is and where bottlenecks really come into play when it comes to building companies. So for example, the work that we do really focuses on data, but also integrations with other software. And so it's really important to think about how fragmented data is and what kind of burden that puts on building AI systems versus just being able to vibe code an app. And one of the reasons I say that is it brings you to security issues really, really quickly as you start scaling companies. And I know we'll probably talk about that more. So I'll end there and pass it over.
Yeah, it's a really great point about security issues, especially in this current environment, right? Cybersecurity is should be a big focus. Rami, from an investor's lens, which AI ideas have the most legs?
Thanks, Elizabeth. So hi, I'm Rami Katz. I'm the CEO of Excell Partners. Excell is a venture capital fund that is affiliated with the University of Rochester. I'm a U of R alum. I also teach here at the business school. We also work closely with multiple universities across upstate New York, Cornell, Rochester Institute of Technology, Upstate Medical, SUNY Research Foundation, et cetera. We invest in startups and try to bring them, kind of make a small investment, make it into a big pile of money, hopefully at the end. I have some investors in the room, so thank you for all those who have supported us. We are raising capital in Upstate Biotech Ventures if you're interested in writing a check, but that's a side discussion. So really, as an investor, what I'm looking for is I'm trying to find this perfect balance between market size and competition. Right? The bigger the market, the bigger the opportunity, but typically the bigger the market, the more competition it is, right? I don't want my startups to go head to head with Meta or Google, right? The likelihood of them succeeding is not high, right? I'd rather create something that they are not doing and be able to close that gap. And similar methodology we apply to looking at AI. I look at AI as almost like a three-tier system from an investment standpoint. The easiest probably to understand is incremental evolution. I'm automating something that is being already done multiple times. Now I'm using a new engine to do it faster, cheaper, better, saving time. On the other end of the spectrum, we have, again, the Metas of the world, the Facebooks of the world, that are really developing new NI agents and new complete different modules, right? Very difficult as a startup to compete with that level of ability to get data of the speed and the resource that we have. So what we're looking is those niches in between. When I take something that can automate an existing process, but also simplify and make processes different than they used before using the power of AI. So I'll give two examples from our portfolio companies. One, Say Hi, a local company, is developing a tools for wellness AI, actually working with some of the hospital systems in our region. They can identify and create a profile of each employee and identify what does the employee need. Are they stressed? Do they need mental counseling? Are they challenged at work? Do they need career coaching? Are there other tools that they need to do that? So on the one hand, we all know the 360 famous annual survey that we all love to do, right? So that's the lowest end of the spectrum of that. So they automate that. But on top of that, they add a lot of intelligence behind it that as an employer, you see your workforce in an aggregate mode in a much faster way. Another example, Ognomy Sleep Health out of Buffalo. They are automating the way people are diagnosed with sleep apnea or other sleep-related disorders. If you have sleep apnea and you want to see a doctor today, it will probably take you 6 months before you get that appointment on the fast end because there's a shortage. So they are combining telehealth, which is, again, automating an existing process. Now, I don't need to go to the doctor. My provider can be anywhere, not necessarily here, with some AI tools that will shorten the questions and expedite and improve the diagnosis. So that is our sweet spot, somewhere that is beyond automation, below going head-to-head with the AI giants.
That's really helpful. Jim, can you just talk to us about how AI has changed the number and the kind of startups you're seeing emerge from Rochester?
Hi, everybody. Jim Senall. I'm the president of NextCorps. Our mission is to help tech startups kind of launch and grow. We're located down building. We've got 72 local tech startups that are working out of the incubator, and we run several industry accelerator programs, optics, climate tech, and some other sectors, software stuff too. So, probably the easiest answer to that is it's just much faster to build a particularly software AI tool. Cheaper, yes. Faster, for sure. And for years we would have entrepreneurs that said, I've worked in this industry 5 years. I've seen this problem. I really have a solution. I don't know how to code. I don't know how to build software. Can I hire a software development agency? They want to charge me $30,000 to build a prototype. So there was always that barrier, and that's kind of gone away now. Give you an example of how quickly you can build a software product today, or at least an MVP of a software product. A few months ago, we ran a startup weekend. Some of you may have heard of that. It was called the AI Startup Jam. And we had 45 people sign up. Friday night, they came in. We taught them how to use some of these AI development tools, vibe coding tools. Saturday, they built. Sunday morning, they built. And Sunday afternoon, those that had something they felt they wanted to present for some prizes presented. 35 of them had fully functioning software apps and web apps that they presented in a day and a half, which was mind-blowing to me. But it just kind of gives you a sense of how quickly people with no software background, by the way, can build these things. So it's starting to show up as an increased number of startups. I'll call them startups. They're not really startups yet, but people that are exploring ideas because it's faster to build something.
Thank you for all of these great answers, and thank you, Daphne, too. So I just wanted to add here, as a writer and a journalist, I'm often looking at the language that is popping up, language shifts along with the economy. And right now we're hearing a lot of people return to the phrase brass tacks, getting down to brass tacks. And that's what you're hearing on this panel, right? There's been all this fear about AI, all these ideas, and so now we're getting down to brass tacks. Where is the value actually created? What is the data saying? So I hope it's a relief to some people as we're hearing more about it. It is to me. So I also wanted to get to the second theme, which is AI and real life entrepreneurship, where getting down to brass tacks, we're talking a little bit more about not so much some of the barriers that entrepreneurs may hit as they're trying to create their startups, especially in regulated spaces. So Karla, how do you balance, as you're speaking with your clients, how do you balance rapid experimentation with responsible deployment, especially when customer trust could be undermined? I'm going to focus on hallucinations because I feel like that's the key issue.
Yeah, sure. I don't necessarily think those two things are at odds with each other. I actually think working in an agile environment where you're running through experimentation at a rapid pace, but met with validation and testing and human feedback to say, yes, you're on the right track. That's how we operate at FLX. I know that's how a lot of classic software teams operate in an agile environment. I think it's important to do so you aren't going so deeply down a path and then once you've productized your solution, you have some risk that you hadn't uncovered earlier. There's ways that we mitigate risk that, again, this isn't dissimilar to how other shops do it, but we often operate in sandbox or controlled environments. I think a common fear of our customers in the market right now is, oh gosh, what if my proprietary corporate information gets into the public domain and is in the ether forever? Well, there's definitely ways to avoid that, right? We can take models in-house on-prem in closed cloud environments. So that's one thing that we do. There's also, we many times are working with toy data sets when we're testing our models before actually going prime time, if you will. That's an easy thing you can do. Another way that we try to help embed trust with our end delivery is by providing confidence scores in the results that we're providing from our models. So we can reduce the workload of the user of the output, right? This answer has a 50% confidence score. Okay, I'm going to look at this one before I look at something that has a 90% score. And with language models, citing back to source documentation is a huge way to win trust. But I think one of the kind of softer things that maybe is overlooked in this conversation is proper expectation setting with the business leaders that you're working with, and letting them understand that the technology is there and it's robust, but it's only as good as the system, the data architecture that you have in place, the data policies that you have. And Daphne kind of alluded to some of this, that if you have kind of cruddy data and cruddy access policies, you might have some slip where people are having access to information that they shouldn't, or the output is not what you would have expected.
I keep wondering if the question is just going to be we do it until and hope there's no huge problem, and we just have to keep using it, right, before we trust it enough. And so it's going to be this controlled rollout of products. But Daphne, I'm just going to move around our order a little bit, because Daphne, I wanted to ask, is what I said right? Like, do we just have to keep trying it and wait for something to go wrong? Or how can we be sure that this is going to work?
Yeah, I think that that's a super important point. And I actually was on a phone call with somebody from MIT yesterday who is actively trying to solve that problem. I think right now, I would say be very careful about what the outcomes of your app is trying to do, or your platform, or whatever it is that you're building. So you probably hear this all the time. Jim is probably one of the people who will say this over and over again. Make sure that you really know what the problem is you're solving, and make sure that you know from your ICP or the person that you're selling to, make sure that you really understand what is it that you want, that they want to have solved. And if you think that you know what it is, probably ask them again, and then ask them 15 more times after that. And the reason that I say that is because it's really difficult to solve a lot of problems, especially generally when it comes to being an entrepreneur, but especially when it comes to trying to build out models. And I think one of the biggest things that I see in young startups is trying to solve multiple things at the same time. So I don't know if that answers that question. I have more if there's more to that question as well.
Well, I think it gets to this idea that we've got to be very careful in how we deploy the models, set up a testing regime, make sure there's human oversight, and all of that process gets simpler if we're focused on the singular problem, because this technology is so new. Is that right?
Yeah, and I would even add too, especially in the beginning, keep your customers in the loop. Make sure that they own their data, that all of the ownership amongst the data that's coming in stays with them, that they control what they see, and also that they can help you control the outcomes of that, because that will help you make sure that you're actually building for the right solution.
I think it leads us to this question of, in a really highly regulated space where there's an already established culture, which is what I wanted to ask Rami, because Excell is raising a fund now that's focused on the medical space. So how do you deploy AI when there are regulatory requirements for transparency and for understanding how the solution was actually arrived at?
I think there's an inherent kind of cultural clash, right? Because if you look at the medical space, everything has to be very transparent. You have good lab practices, good manufacturing processes. If you want to touch patients, most of the time you have to go through an IRB process, an internal review board. You have to go through the FDA and disclose everything, go back and forth. And here comes this black box, right, where you put some bunch of information in and something comes out where I cannot really reverse engineer, right? And that's an inherent culture clash with what we're working as. So our approach is, if you're thinking of the entire value chain, AI does not go to the end. AI brings tools and shortens decision-making pathways for the final human decision. I think it will take time before we are really able to rely on an AI module to run from soup to nuts and do everything, because you can't go wrong when you're touching a patient. It's unethical, and I don't want it to go through a procedure with something that is driven by a black box that hallucinates from time to time, right? But on the other hand, when you look at medical procedures, many have a failure rate. So we've learned as anybody involved in medical systems, learn to overcome failure rates how to incorporate them in the process, and just make sure you have enough safeguards.
I'm going to ask an unscripted question.
Oh my God, I'm leaving. Yeah.
So I've been covering the VC industry for a long time, and I can tell I'm sitting next to somebody who thinks deeply about these issues and patient safety. But in the VC space, there are a lot of people who don't have that same commitment to ethics, and they have a lot of power now in this black box environment to throw money at companies that may not have all these safety. Are you worried about that?
Very much so. Beyond my professional role as my private role, right? But I'll say this way: think of 23andMe, right? Whoever did that, right? They promised all the safeguards, and they were bought by a private corporation, Genentech, right? Now all that genetic information is available for everybody. So like anything, right? You want to use it for good, you'll use it for good. If you want to use it for bad, you'll use it for bad. I'm an optimist at heart. And I think at our core, because we are so well connected to hospital systems and universities, being ethical is in our DNA.
Yeah,
so I'm a recovering attorney. That said it.
And maybe an advantage, right? The ethics may be an advantage in this environment. It also makes me think of Kurt Vonnegut's quote: "Never in the history of the world is so much relied on entrepreneurs and men." Jim, it is a good one. So I wanted to ask, kind of focusing in on Rochester, what capability gap worries you the most when you think about the entrepreneurs in those, like where the money just flows around like water in Silicon Valley or New York? What capability gap worries you between those spaces and regional hubs like Rochester?
I think Daphne kind of hit the nail on the head already. The gap that you always see with entrepreneurs, or often see, and it's no different with AI built software companies or other companies, is this whole proving you're solving a problem, product market fit, customer fit, and some traction. So to get investment nowadays, you really have to show that customers demonstrate they want what you've got. So today you can build products a lot faster and using AI, but the question's sort of now not if I can build it, but should I build it? And that's something still foundational for any startup, any entrepreneur. It doesn't matter if you're using AI tools or not. You can build a lot faster now with these tools, and you can get something in front of customers, which is great. But you really have to, as Daphne said, ask them, not only just once or twice, but keep asking and honing in on, are you really solving a problem? Because only then do you have a business and something that can scale.
That's a great answer. This makes me feel very hopeful for regional hubs and indeed for our country, right? Because we need more economic development to be widespread. So next theme, if you will. I hope we're doing okay on time. Actionable advice for founders. Rami, what AI-specific diligence red flags do founders sometimes estimate when pitching?
So the biggest issue, I think, AI has become sometimes this magic wand. Oh, I'll just collect this data, plug it into an AI engine, and will come up great results. So can everybody else, right? So the challenge, I think it goes really the same theme as what Jim said. What is the value proposition? Why would you win? Why would anybody buy from you, right? Because it's, again, the opening statement that I made about the size of the market and the level of competition. Yes, now we open new markets. Now everything is much more attainable, but it's not only attainable to you, it's attainable to everybody else. So how are you going to distinguish yourself from another 1,000 entrepreneurs that have the same idea and run through it? Is it because you can demonstrate industry knowledge, industry connections? Are you doing it with collaboration with a customer or with a partner that will ensure that whatever you develop will be embedded and actually utilized, and then you'll get real life information from it and improve the system? So the onus on saying it's not enough to show that I can build it, because as everybody said it, yes, we know you can. Now the pressure point is slightly different. How do you actually deploy it, embed it, and how do you show, in addition to revenue, continuous access to continuous data and continuous improvement cycle that will makes it a virtuous cycle and makes you moving faster than your competition?
Thank you. Daphne, what are the biggest mistakes you see businesses making as they deploy AI?
I think that's a really good question. If it's okay, maybe I can also add a little bit. I wanted to add actually on to what Jim was saying earlier about the regional spaces, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And the reason that I want to add to that is because I think a lot of companies think that they need to be in New York City or San Francisco or in all of these really big hubs, which it's very true that there is a huge concentration of funds there, and that is really important to be there. But I want to also talk to my experience too about why Rochester and Buffalo have been super impactful in what I've done. Sorry, I know that this is not the same question, but I think it's really important because we touched on you have to have something to show now. You can't just have a product. You have to have paying customers. And I can tell you that in the last year, every time I've called somebody from Rochester or Buffalo and said, hey, I'm from 43 North, I was a U of R graduate, everybody has picked up my phone. Everybody has said, you know what? Either I'm happy to beta with you, or I know somebody else who can beta with you. And it is so incredibly helpful. And today it is so true that if you don't have revenue, you won't get funding. So sorry, that is like totally not the same question, but
no,
just
it's great. It's a great answer. Yeah. I mean, that was the issue everyone talked about for years with the startup revolution, right? That people would do these companies and have no revenue and suddenly be worth billions of dollars. It was crazy, and in fact, it led us to an enormous crash at the end of the startup boom. Let's see. Let me order these the right way. Jim, just going off these that topic, smaller markets have struggled to find talent. Do you see AI changing that equation for cities like Rochester?
I think in a couple of ways, perhaps. So you mentioned, perhaps entry-level talent and AI might take some of those things. And so I think if there was a struggle in smaller markets, now we're kind of blessed in Rochester, Buffalo, we have a lot of technology talent. We lead the nation in kind of patents per capita and in STEM degrees. So I don't think we've seen a lot of tech and talent shortage. But I think what helps the shortage, if there is one, is really remote work. So nowadays, probably every company that we touch has employees located elsewhere. And I think that's probably been more of an impact than anything.
Karla, you've spoken about this when I was doing research on the panelists. I noticed that you had been an informed contributor to this conversation about what about data. And so I want to ask what worries you most, or how well are companies generally doing in terms of the quality of the data that they're using?
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, a fear of companies is data getting out there. And then the secondary fear after we say, okay, there's ways to safeguard against that is making sure that people within a corporation have access to the right data and a LLM isn't giving, corporate secrets to entry-level employees, et cetera. And that all really stems back to a key area that I think is we maybe hopscotch over to get to AI. You have to have good data. You have to have quality systems in place. And, we've been sort of discussing AI in relation to startups here today, but a lot of our business is with more mature companies who have legacy systems that very siloed data systems that don't talk to one another. So there's this big push to check a box in businesses to say you're using AI today. And when businesses bring us in, we have to give sometimes the hard conversation of, we're really excited that you're excited about AI, but there's some steps we have to take care of first before you can really extract the maximum amount of value out of AI, or else you're really not going to get the performance you're looking for.
I'm ask you a follow-up unscripted question as well. I mean, aren't there are concerns though now that, and I don't understand the technical aspects of this, but about accessing the power of AI, right? That's where NVIDIA and all these companies are creating their business models, is controlling access to the GPUs, right? So is that an issue for your average everyday entrepreneur?
It isn't from my vantage point. Now, that's not necessarily the holy grail of answers, but I think you mentioned earlier these anecdotal stories that catch the headlines, and it doesn't mean that they're not real issues, but they're not necessarily as pervasive as our fears might lead us to believe. So, a lot of the models that we deliver can live and operate on a laptop. I mean, it's not the same model as what Meta and OpenAI and the language models that are sucking up all these, crazy horsepower of energy and hardware requirements. And that's why it's, again, important as business leaders to understand, we don't all have to be data scientists, but we should know enough to be dangerous about what are the risks and considerations that we need to associate with different forms of AI.
That's really, yes, please.
So I want to give a plug to New York State. So recognizing this is such a big issue, UB is now host to Empire AI, a supercomputer that the U of R is part of that network. So if you're part of that university, there are state players that are coming in and providing assets that you can use further. But also goes to me to this kind of basic statement, I think, the delta that I don't think most entrepreneurs understand between the large players and what we do when we use AI, because we can do it on a laptop. They need a supercomputer, right? So that's orders of magnitude. And I'm always amazed how many entrepreneurs come and say, oh, yeah, our AI model will do that.
In understanding the difference between training a model and running inference. And
Right.
running inference is, what you're doing on the day-to-day, and that's much lighter weight than the model training.
Got it. Probably need a few additional classes, right, to give business leaders some context for learning this.
I'm sure there's a university here that teaches them.
Okay, should I shift to questions? I wanted to, and anybody else have anything they want to add to the current discussion? Jim, do you want to chime in?
Another thing I'm optimistic about for Rochester is that the horsepower required in the chips and everything, there will be new technologies, optical technologies, use which can solve that problem. There's a company that we were just introduced to that is 100 times more powerful than NVIDIA's most powerful chip at 1/100th the energy usage using optical. So given our strengths here in Rochester, we're also optimistic that we could help solve those problems. So not necessarily AI specific, but what's going to feed the whole AI infrastructure.
Yeah, I remember visiting a startup here in Rochester working on that efficiency. Daphne, we didn't ask you this question about, really the capacity, and do entrepreneurs in Rochester or other regional hubs have the access to do, a home run AI company? Could you build a home run AI company? What a VC would say is a home run AI company. Could you build that in a regional hub today?
So I very much think so. Otherwise, I don't think I would have accepted the 43 North money. I think it was a huge part of why I did. And I think that actually regional companies, like I said before, there's a lot to say about San Francisco and New York and all those other places, but there are huge, huge benefits to being regional. And I think one of the biggest things is you literally cannot get funding right now without actually having something to show, some revenue. And if you cannot get that, when you go to San Francisco or New York or Boston, you're competing with every other large company and all the YC companies, all the tech star companies, and you're kind of in a sea of a lot of similar people. When you're in regional places, you become the star. Everybody wants to talk to you. Everybody wants to see what you're doing. Everyone wants to help you succeed. And one of the things that I've seen about Rochester and Buffalo is just that everybody wants to hold you up. Everybody wants to say, I can help you. I can get you to this person. I can connect with X, Y, and Z. And the other thing too, so the business that I'm building, we expect that we can be a fund returner. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking at raising money, one of the things that VCs want to know is, can you return their fund in X number of years? And I think that we can do that. And one of the reasons that I think we can do that is because not only do we focus on mid-market, but we focus on enterprise. And we are significantly more likely to get enterprise conversations because we're regional versus being in San Francisco or New York City, because all these people are here, but they're way more accessible here than they are in San Francisco or New York City.
Okay, we have a big fat stack of questions from the audience, which is fantastic. So I'm going to apologize in advance. I don't think we'll get through all of them, but we have the reception afterwards to continue talking. This comes from the live stream. So I'm going to read it and then I'll shift it to somebody. I have sent many in the tech field advice that we do not consider AI as simply a technology as it is beyond that in capability. So is AI more than a technology? Would the panel share their perspective on this issue? Jim?
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's a technology, because you can look at companies are building underlying AI tools and technology. It is a capability, and it's multiple capabilities. And so, as new tools and new applications come out, figuring out which ones you're going to use to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish is really what kind of end users have to figure out.
Anybody want to add to that?
I think it's no different than, to some extent, than the internet. Sorry, if the internet came about as a tool, but everything exponentially grew from there. It opened up so many other avenues. The same thing with AI. We've seen that before. I think probably now it will go faster and more exponentially broader, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering, I think it took maybe a decade before it became clear how the internet was going to create business models that actually worked. So this may happen faster, but it will still be a process. Okay, let's see. What intersection points, use cases between, this is a good one, between AI and quantum computing? Okay, anyone want to take that? Daphne, I think you might be the best one.
I don't think that I'm the best one for that, but I actually can shed some light on the previous comment, because one thing that I would say, I don't think we've talked about differentiation or moats or competition yet, but one thing that I would say is everybody is building a tool right now. And if you can actually build something that helps people execute on stuff, actually do an action, that is something that will differentiate you aside from all of the other tools that are coming out. A lot of people are building stuff that generally are useful, but don't actually functionally create an action. So for an example, like let's say you're getting a lot of invoices in, people want help getting those invoices paid. Being able to execute that action is something that is solvable and differentiated and has a moat. So something to just add to that.
Yeah, maybe I can add a little perspective on the quantum computing in that, as an observer of the financial system for a long time, I can tell you they run especially in the innovation space, they run to the hot new idea. AI has been the hot new idea in finance, in venture, in innovation funding. Quantum is the new hot new idea, and it is coming on really quickly. And I think that's in part because quantum requires such massive amounts of infrastructure. So the funds are going to be raising a lot of money to try and do quantum. Whether that means there are use cases, whatever it means, right? That's not how finance works. It's just money kind of chasing an idea.
And maybe to combine the two last questions, I think if you look at quantum computing, yes, it's a lofty goal. I'm not sure we fully understand how it will work, but obviously will allow computing power to be exponentially larger. We see an ecosystem of tools. Now you need a faster way to transfer the data. You need multiple components that make the value proposition. And I think the same will happen to an AI, right? And once we get to the real meat of it is when we start developing all the tools around this big AI engine that actually makes it to an enabler. And I think that's to Daphne's point. Eventually, we need to go to a specific, very usable end goal. And for that, AI is not enough. You need a whole ecosystem around it. And we see that starting to function in quantum computing as well.
Yeah, I will say I can mention that at the spring meetings of the central banks last year, I was in Washington and dropped in on those. The central bankers are thinking about quantum as a way to facilitate property transfers. So.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense too, especially when it comes to banking, because it's really important for heavy data usage. And so industries like manufacturing or banking or things like that, where their data is extremely complex and they just generally have big data, that's where it's going to be really important. But I also agree that this is still extremely early and is very much the hot topic of now. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next few years.
Yeah, it's a great question. So is there, this is a good one, maybe Karla could, is there a true need for prompt engineering?
Well, this actually kind of goes back to our conversation we had before coming into this room where, yeah, I think right now there is for sure, but also being maybe a more full brain, critical thinker type person, that is becoming just cachet right now. And you realize when you see the output, if you get a document or a PowerPoint that comes to your desk, it's really easy for a critical thinker to say, this came from AI, or for professors to understand where their students might be using AI a little bit too much. But if you can properly ask questions and understand context, you're going to get so much more out of your AI. I think we can all agree with that. Your head there shaking. And I love that we're going to see the rise of the liberal arts degree. It's just like pregnant.
Yeah.
But it's really important. And I just kind of an extra add to this question for students who are coming out of STEM, don't disregard the soft skills and the working on your communication and your writing skills, because when we interview people, that's my number one go-to is, the STEM and the tech, it's table stakes, but you have to have these other capabilities to really be a key contributor.
And maybe I can add to that one thing real quick. If anyone here is a communications major, start looking at AI companies. Their salaries right now are starting at like 250, and some of the major companies are doing like 750 in terms of salary. So super, super important in the next few years.
See my next career after journalism. Okay. Okay. This is another great question. I think I'd love everyone to weigh in this one. What regulation should be in place with the use of AI? And I might broaden it to just say, maybe if you would rather not cite specific regulations, but what kind of processes do we need to produce these regulations? Like, do we need new institutions? How are we going to set up a world that governs AI?
I'll jump in. I'm a recovering attorney by training, so I apologize in advance. But I think, to me, that's the process issue is the biggest challenge. The legislators are still behind the internet era. The rules that we have don't work in the internet world. Now I'm really dreading what will happen to our regulations, our ability to pass new laws in an area that add a 10x speed factor to this, right? We really need to rethink how are we passing laws we may have to rethink how we are voting, right? And is that becoming more of a, we have the technology theoretically to vote directly on almost every topic, right? You can poll the population and have an answer without really going through a representative model. I'm not arguing for that, but I'm saying as a way of thinking about the issue, we'll have to fundamentally change the way we're passing laws because otherwise we will not keep up.
I don't have an answer to that question because when you think about policy and guidelines for how AI should or could be used, to Rami's point, right? The policymakers are usually so far behind how fast the technology is evolving. In our 30-person nonprofit, we finally put an AI policy in place. So late, right? Now it's changed already. And the tools we referenced in our policy don't even exist. So, for the government or other agencies to get involved, it's just going to be a slow process. And the other side of that is, which I struggle with, other places won't have those same restrictions, perhaps.
Yep.
And so from a competition standpoint, how do you balance, right, policy and ethical and all that kind of stuff with if somebody else is outperforming because they're a little less so on those fronts, what do you do with that? And I don't know.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have commentary on the regulation part, but more the policy that businesses shouldn't wait for the regulation to roll out because it is going to take time and it's probably going to be wrong when it comes out. But having some guideline, and it doesn't have to be perfect, it's going to change. Just to put some guardrails up on your own business to protect against risk is important. I saw a statistic a week or two back, it's something like 90% of employees are using some form of GPT or Claude or to assist with their day-to-day. And it's usually on a private, hopefully paid account, but oftentimes it's on a free account, which is like the big no-no, right? So show your employees that you're taking AI seriously by putting something together and enabling some level of paid enterprise subscription so you're not putting your business at risk.
Daphne, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I might take a different approach to it though and talk a little bit about people who are using AI and what they should be thinking about too. So one of the big things that I think a lot about now when I'm looking at like terms of service and like all these new softwares that I'm working with, a big part is data privacy and also ownership and transparency. So one of the things that I think now is very well talked about is how does GPT use your data to train its own models? That's very clear, but I think that that's not clear when it comes to other AI companies that you're working with or that you're utilizing on your day-to-day. One of the reasons that I bring this up is because if you go out and you build a company and you start using other companies to build your company, which is very common and very important, and you should do that, you should know what kind of data privacy policies that they have and how transparent they are about what they do with your data. So for example, there was a company, there now have been many of these vibe-coded companies that have had pen tests or like they've had secure ways of hacking into their systems. And some of them have been hacked in general. But what's happening is that data, the last one that I read about, they had 6,000 people's financial records that were then put out onto the internet. And part of that was just data privacy that they didn't really understand from somebody that they integrated with. So I think that it's really important to now look at those terms and conditions in a way that previously maybe you hadn't been thinking about before. It also goes for the phones that you use and all of the technology that you use, because they're now tracking every part of what you do to sell that out to other people as well.
The other half of this question, which I just want to share because it gives a greater weight, and I'll plug my book a little bit. So the other half of this question was, for example, there are reports that weaponry is being outfitted with AI decision-making for targets. Obviously, this is in the news right now. And our book, the tagline on the back is something like "Business overtook government. So what happens next?" And the reason that Seth and I wrote this book was recognizing that business is now, to a large extent, in control of society. And so there are decisions that you're going to be making that have huge weight. We saw this with Anthropic, right? Saying we don't want our systems used in this way. And our suggestion in the book, Not a Perfect Answer, was that companies and entrepreneurs need to very early on figure out what their values are and then have a way to stick to those as you get these really difficult questions. It is likely that AI will enable copycats to reproduce or ideas and innovations quickly. How would you define your IP and protect it from copycats?
So in my day job, right, in my evening job, I also run Rochester Angel Network and Angel Fund, and we were talking to a startup, and somebody asked the question, what's your IP and your patents? And it's a platform and there's data. And his answer was, really the only IP for software products is customers and customer traction. So no question, build something and it's primarily a software product or even analytical tools or somebody else can build it. Hard to get patents. If you've got a new medical device or drug or something else and patents or something. Yeah. But really, I think, and, be very curious to hear, the professional VC's opinion on this stuff. But customers and traction and becoming a leader in the market tends to be much more important than can I protect, software.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think formal IP protection is part of the answer. It's not the answer. I think ability to touch the market and almost incorporating into your strategy a way of acquiring more and better data so you are faster than anybody else. That is the only answer, right? Google was the best search engine before AI, not necessarily because, well, they found a different way of stacking the information, but the more we use it, it learns, it becomes better, right? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have to find a way to incorporate that in your strategy because patent protection, assuming your competitors, and some are not as ethical as we are blessed to have in the United States, will obey the intellectual property rules. It still may not be enough because somebody can throw way more money into it and solve it faster if you don't have a unique advantage.
Daphne, Karla, do you want to add to this one?
Sure. For us, we're not necessarily creating anything new or novel. We're just doing kind of what Rami said. We're helping our customers get to the end faster. And our models are usually embedded into a bigger process that might have its own IP protections. But I don't think we need to be fighting the IP game anymore. It's really about the things that the guys have already mentioned.
Daphne?
I would just say everyone's made awesome points, but one thing that was pointed out to me when I was early in my journey was the danger of patents, actually. So everybody wants to see that you have something new, some novel IP and patentable IP. And like Karla is saying, that's very hard to do now with software. But the other thing too is if you're a super early startup, especially in the software space, and you patent something, you have to have a lot of funding behind you and legal teams behind you because once you put a patent out there, everyone can see it. And then it's really up to whoever has, the most amount of funding to be able to back that up. Because if somebody takes that IP from you, it will be very hard to fight them. So one thing that I would just be very careful about if you're talking to investors and they're interested in patenting what you have, just think through what that will look like.
A great point. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. No more. No, we don't have time for even one more question. One more question. I think it's a really good one, and it goes to something Roberto and I were talking about before, which is how essential it is for capitalism that we have a functioning rule of law in the United States, worldwide really, but we're lucky to have it in the US and we need to protect it. The question is, if AI causes harm, legal advice, patient diagnosis, who is responsible and accountable? Do we have an answer for that?
Again, as a recovering attorney, you have a practical answer. Whoever has enough money to pay for it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's probably the hard, honest truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
The system will figure it out.
Right.
You'll get sued. But yes, I guess I'll go back to the internet example. We have difficulty figuring out intellectual property of content property rights, right? What happens if I stream content in, whatever, in Uganda that is made and so on? Am I violating somebody's intellectual property content rights? We really haven't figured that out clearly. So it will take time until we figure out the next, but there will be attorneys that will try.
Yeah.
If you think about AI as a tool that a physician might be using to make their diagnosis, they use tools today, think about pre-AI, and if there was a poor decision made, where would that responsibility lie? You could maybe look at it through that lens as well.
Right. And we do have a system for figuring out that responsibility that does work its way through the courts eventually. Yeah. Well, all I can say is, wow, amazing, amazing questions. The panelists were so informed and thoughtful, and I really appreciate all of their answers and everybody for being here. Oh, yeah. Oh, and Rami's giving a wrap up. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I was tasked with doing the wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you. So on behalf of the University of Rochester Entrepreneurs Network Executive Committee, I was a part of, I really want to thank all the panelists. Thank you so much. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully you guys did as well. Thank you to Elizabeth for moderating a panel. Don't forget to get her book. I also like to thank our co-hosts, the Simon Business School, the AIN Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, the Hagem School of Engineering, the Gwen M. Green Center for Career Education and Connection, and the Women's Network for helping make this conversation possible. As Roberto mentioned, I think the University of Rochester Entrepreneurs Network was created by U of R alumni to really support entrepreneurs. So pay attention to it, hopefully. It was created in support of the Office of Alumni Relations and Constituent Engagement. That's where this idea was incubated, but this is really the first of many conversations going to happen. The next conversation is going to take place in the fall in New York City. The topic is something you want to pay attention to, is how to raise money from VCs and is AI changing that? So usually everybody wants some money. So if you want to find out how to get money in an AI world, follow on and tune to that. So we're going to talk about AI-focused companies, how VCs make those investments, etc. And thank you for being all being part of this first gathering. Hopefully it's the first of many. Hopefully you learned something about it. And whether you joined online, or in person, we really look forward to seeing you in the next event in the fall with New York City. And everybody's here. Follow us to the rotunda for the reception. Thank you.